In the center of the city's richest district stood a mansion that looked more like a private fortress than a home. Tall iron gates guarded the entrance. Security cameras watched every corner. The long driveway curved through perfectly trimmed gardens before stopping at a massive stone building that shined under the morning sun. This was the home of Adrian Cole. People across the world knew his name. Some called him a genius. Others called him ruthless. But everyone agreed on one thing. Adrian Cole was a man who controlled everything. His technology company had grown into a global empire. His software powered banks, airports, and entire governments. His decisions could move billions of dollars in seconds. And yet, despite his success, Adrian lived a life that felt strangely empty. Inside the mansion, everything moved with strict order. The house staff worked like employees in a corporate office. Schedules were printed and posted on the walls. Cleaning times were timed down to the minute. Even the way the dining table was arranged followed a detailed guide. Nothing was left to chance. Adrian believed control was the only way to survive. He had learned that lesson long ago. Years before the luxury cars, private jets, and billion-dollar deals, Adrian Cole had been a poor boy living in a broken apartment. His father had disappeared when he was young. His mother worked 2 jobs but still struggled to feed the family. And the people who promised to help them had betrayed them. Those memories never left Adrian. Poverty had taught him one brutal truth. Trust was dangerous. So Adrian built his life on rules instead. Rules meant control. Control meant safety. And safety meant no one could hurt him again. But the price of that control was something Adrian rarely noticed. Loneliness. Every morning, Adrian walked through the mansion like a silent storm. Employees moved out of his way quickly. No one spoke unless spoken to. His presence carried the quiet tension of a boss entering a boardroom. Even the air seemed to change when he passed. To Adrian, the workers were simply part of the system. Necessary pieces. Replaceable pieces. That morning, while the mansion prepared for another perfectly scheduled day, a new employee quietly pushed a cleaning cart down the hallway. Her name was Lena. Unlike the marble floors and shining glass windows around her, Lena's life had never been polished or easy. She was small, quiet, and careful with every movement. Her dark hair was tied back simply. Her uniform was neat but worn from long hours of work. She had started working at the mansion only a few weeks ago. Yet the other staff had already noticed something about her. Lena never complained. Even when the work was exhausting. Even when the rules felt impossible. She simply nodded and kept working. And more than that, she was kind. If someone dropped a tray, Lena helped pick it up. If someone looked tired, Lena quietly offered to help finish their tasks. The older housekeeper, Mrs. Alvarez, often watched her with a soft expression. Some people carry storms inside them, she once told another employee. But they still choose to be gentle. Lena was one of those people. There was a sadness in her eyes that never fully disappeared. But she hid it well. Every morning before starting her shift, Lena would pause for a moment outside the mansion gates. She would place one hand lightly on her stomach. Just for a second. Then she would take a quiet breath and walk inside. No one noticed. Not yet. Inside the mansion, Lena moved carefully through the long corridors, wiping polished tables and dusting expensive decorations that cost more than her yearly salary. She worked quickly and silently. Her goal was simple. Do the job. Follow the rules. Stay invisible. Because losing this job was not an option. Not now. Not when someone else depended on her. At the other end of the mansion, Adrian Cole sat inside his private office. Large glass windows overlooked the city skyline. 3 computer screens displayed financial charts and business reports. Adrian read them without emotion. To him, people were numbers. Risk, profit, loss. Even employees were part of that equation. Efficient workers stayed. Problems were removed. It was a system that had built his empire. And Adrian trusted that system more than he trusted any human being. Outside the office door, Lena quietly cleaned the hallway floor. Her movements were slow and careful. For a moment, she paused and pressed her hand gently against the wall. A wave of dizziness passed through her. Her breathing became shallow. But she forced herself to stay steady. She could not afford mistakes. After a moment, the feeling faded. She straightened up and continued cleaning as if nothing had happened. Inside the office, Adrian closed another billion-dollar deal over the phone. His voice was calm, cold, controlled. When the call ended, he leaned back in his chair and stared out at the city below. Thousands of people moved through the streets like tiny shadows, each living their own struggles, their own stories. But Adrian saw none of it, because his world had no room for weakness, no room for personal problems. and certainly no room for scandal. What he didn't realize was that only a few steps away, one quiet employee was carrying a secret that would soon shake his perfectly controlled world. Lena kept cleaning the hallway floor. But deep inside her chest, fear slowly tightened, because the truth she was hiding could cost her everything. And in Adrian Cole's mansion, mistakes were never forgiven. The mansion was always quiet in the early morning, before the chef started cooking, before the assistants arrived with folders and schedules, before Adrian Cole stepped out of his office and the entire house seemed to hold its breath. Those first hours of the day belonged to the cleaning staff. Lena moved slowly through the long dining hall, wiping the polished wooden table that could seat 20 guests. Sunlight slipped through the tall windows and reflected across the shining surface. Normally, Lena worked quickly. But that morning something felt different. A sudden wave of nausea rushed through her stomach. She froze. Her hand tightened around the cloth as she leaned against the edge of the table, breathing slowly, trying to calm the feeling. This had been happening more often lately. First it was just tiredness, then dizziness, and now the sickness came almost every morning. Lena closed her eyes for a moment. She already knew the truth, but admitting it out loud made it real. She was pregnant. The thought still felt unreal inside her mind. She placed her hand gently over her stomach again, the same way she did every morning outside the gate. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I'm trying," she murmured softly. "Trying to survive. Trying to stay strong. Trying to protect the small life growing inside her." But surviving inside Adrian Cole's mansion was not easy for someone hiding a secret like hers. The job required long hours, heavy work, constant movement, and there were strict rules. Very strict rules. The staff handbook was clear about one thing. Employees were expected to keep their personal lives away from the estate. No drama. No scandals. No distractions. Adrian Cole believed problems made workers inefficient. And inefficient workers were replaceable. Lena knew that better than anyone. She had seen employees disappear from the staff list overnight. No explanations. No second chances. If anyone discovered her pregnancy, she would lose everything. And she couldn't afford that. Not when she still had someone else depending on her. A few minutes later, Lena carefully pushed her cleaning cart down another hallway. Her steps were slower than usual. Her back ached. Her energy was fading much faster these days. As she reached the staircase, a voice behind her spoke gently. "Lena, are you all right?" It was Mrs. Alvarez, the older housekeeper who managed most of the cleaning staff. She had worked at the mansion for nearly 15 years. Her eyes were sharp, but her heart was kind. Lena forced a small smile. "I'm fine," she said quietly. Mrs. Alvarez stepped closer, studying her carefully. "You look pale," she said. "You've looked tired all week." Lena quickly lowered her eyes and adjusted the supplies on her cart. "I didn't sleep much," she replied softly. It wasn't exactly a lie. Sleep had become difficult lately. Her thoughts kept racing at night. Questions without answers. Fear without solutions. Mrs. Alvarez watched her for another moment but didn't press further. Instead, she placed a gentle hand on Lena's shoulder. "Just be careful," she said quietly. "This house isn't kind to people who struggle." Lena nodded silently. She understood the warning. As Mrs. Alvarez walked away, Lena slowly exhaled the breath she had been holding. But whispers had already begun. Later that afternoon, two kitchen workers quietly talked while washing dishes. "Have you noticed Lena?" one of them said. "The new maid." "Yes. She's always tired. And she's been holding her stomach lately." The second worker frowned. "You think she's sick?" The first one lowered his voice. "Or pregnant." The word hung in the air like a dangerous secret. Pregnant. Inside Adrian Cole's mansion, that word could destroy someone's career instantly. Rumors spread quietly through the staff. Nothing loud. Just whispers. Small glances. Curious looks. And Lena felt it. Every time someone stared a little longer than usual. Every time conversations stopped when she entered a room. Still she kept working. Because stopping meant thinking. And thinking meant remembering. Remembering the life she had escaped. Only a year ago, Lena had been living in a tiny apartment with her younger brother, Daniel. Their childhood had been far from peaceful. After their parents died, they had been passed between relatives who treated them more like burdens than family. Lena had worked small jobs for years just to keep Daniel in school. Cleaning restaurants, washing laundry, working night shifts. She had promised herself one thing. Her brother would have a better future. When Lena finally found work at Adrian Cole's mansion, it felt like a miracle. The pay was steady. The environment was stable. and Daniel could finally focus on his studies. But now, everything felt fragile again, because raising a child alone was something Lena had never planned, especially when she was barely surviving herself. That evening, as Lena finished her shift, she sat quietly in the small staff locker room. Everyone else had already left. The room was silent. She slowly reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was a cheap pregnancy test she had taken days earlier. 2 faint lines stared back at her. There was no doubt. She closed her eyes, gripping the paper tightly. Fear filled her chest. But something else was there too. A strange warmth. A quiet determination. Lena whispered softly to herself, "We'll figure it out." She didn't know how yet, but she would find a way, because survival had always been part of her life. And now she wasn't fighting just for herself anymore. But outside the locker room, the whispers were growing louder. And inside Adrian Cole's mansion, secrets rarely stayed hidden for long. Sooner or later, the truth always found its way to the surface. The morning began like every other morning in Adrian Cole's mansion. Quiet, precise, controlled. Employees moved through the halls with careful steps. The kitchen staff prepared breakfast with silent efficiency. Security guards checked their monitors while assistants reviewed Adrian's busy schedule. Everything followed a system. Adrian Cole demanded nothing less. Inside his private office, Adrian stood near the large glass windows overlooking the city. His sharp eyes scanned a financial report displayed on one of his screens. The numbers were excellent. Another successful quarter. Another competitor crushed. But even success did not bring him comfort. To Adrian, success was simply proof that his system worked. Control, discipline, order. Without those things, everything collapsed. Just like it had during his childhood. A sudden knock interrupted his thoughts. His assistant stepped inside. "Mr. Cole, the investors from London will arrive in 30 minutes, she said. Adrian nodded without looking up. "Prepare the conference room." "Yes, sir." She left quickly. Adrian adjusted the cuffs of his expensive suit and walked toward the hallway. The mansion immediately became tense as he appeared. Employees straightened their posture. Conversation stopped. Eyes lowered. Adrian moved through the corridor with the calm confidence of someone who expected the world to obey him. For a moment, everything seemed perfectly normal. Until the unexpected happened. At the far end of the hallway, Lena was cleaning a decorative shelf filled with expensive glass sculptures. Her body felt weak that morning. The nausea had been stronger than usual. But she forced herself to continue working. She couldn't stop. Not now. Not when rumors were already circling. She reached up to wipe dust from the top shelf. Suddenly the room spun. Her vision blurred. A sharp wave of dizziness rushed through her body. Before she could catch herself, her hand slipped. One of the glass sculptures fell from the shelf. Crash. The sound shattered the quiet hallway. The expensive sculpture exploded into pieces across the marble floor. Lena stumbled backward, losing her balance. Her hand instinctively moved to protect her stomach as she dropped to one knee. The hallway froze. Employees stared in shock. Because everyone knew one thing. Adrian Cole hated mistakes. And Adrian himself had just turned the corner. His eyes immediately locked onto the broken glass scattered across the floor. Silence spread through the hallway like ice. Adrian walked slowly toward the scene. His step felt heavy. Dangerous. Lena's heart pounded as she tried to stand. Her breathing was uneven. Her hand still pressed protectively against her stomach. And that was the moment Adrian noticed it. His sharp gaze narrowed. His voice was cold. "What happened here?" No one answered. The staff looked down, afraid to speak. Adrian's eyes shifted to Lena. She looked pale, unsteady, and her hand was still resting over her stomach. A small detail. But Adrian Cole was a man who noticed details. His expression hardened. "You," he said sharply. Lena slowly lifted her head. Fear flashed across her face. Adrian stepped closer, studying her carefully. "You look unwell," he said. Lena swallowed nervously. "I'm fine, sir," she said quietly. Adrian's eyes dropped again to her stomach, then back to her face. A realization began forming in his mind. "Cold. Sure. Suspicious. You're pregnant." The words fell into the hallway like a thunderclap. Gasps spread quietly among the staff. Lena's heart stopped. For a moment she couldn't breathe. She hadn't expected this. Not like this. Not here. Adrian's voice grew harder. "Answer me." Lena's lips trembled slightly. But she said nothing. That silence only made Adrian angrier. "You work in my home," he continued. "Under my rules." His voice echoed across the marble walls. "And one of those rules is very clear. No scandals. No personal drama. No problems that damage the reputation of this house." His eyes burned with frustration. Who is the father? The question hung heavily in the air. Lena lowered her eyes. She knew this moment would come someday. But she had hoped it wouldn't be today. And definitely not like this. "I can't say," she whispered. The hallway grew even colder. Adrian stared at her as if she had just insulted him. "You can't say?" he repeated slowly. Lena shook her head. Her voice was quiet but firm. "It's personal." To Adrian those words sounded like defiance. Like dishonesty. His jaw tightened. "You expect me to believe that?" he said sharply. Lena remained silent. Her silence only confirmed Adrian's worst assumptions. In his mind, the situation was simple. An employee had broken his rules, created a problem, and now refused to explain herself. In Adrian's world, problems were eliminated. Immediately. Without hesitation. He turned toward the security guard standing nearby. "Terminate her employment," Adrian ordered coldly. The words hit Lena like a physical blow. Her head snapped up. "Sir, please?" But Adrian had already turned away. "Escort her off the property." The security guard hesitated for a moment. Everyone in the hallway looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Alvarez stepped forward slightly. "Mr. Cole," she said gently, "perhaps we should." Adrian cut her off with a single sharp look. The message was clear. No arguments. No discussion. His decision was final. The guard stepped toward Lena slowly. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Lena's hands trembled. Her entire future had just collapsed in a single moment. She had no savings, no backup plan, and now, no job. Her eyes filled with tears, but she forced herself not to cry. Not here. Not in front of everyone. She bent down slowly and picked up her small bag from the cleaning cart. The hallway was completely silent as she walked toward the front doors. Employees watched helplessly. Some looked angry. Others looked ashamed. But no one dared challenge Adrian Cole. Because everyone knew what happened to people who did. As Lena reached the massive entrance doors, she paused for a moment. Her hand rested gently on her stomach again. A quiet promise. Then she stepped outside. The doors closed behind her with a heavy sound. Inside the mansion, Adrian returned to his office without another word. To him, the situation was resolved. Order had been restored. Rules had been enforced. The system was working exactly as it should. But outside the mansion gates, dark clouds were gathering. And for the first time in a long time, a storm was coming that Adrian Cole could not control. The sky had already begun to darken when Lena stepped outside the mansion gates. The massive iron doors closed behind her with a heavy sound that echoed in the empty street. For a moment she just stood there. Her small bag hung loosely from her shoulder. The cold evening wind brushed against her face, carrying the distant smell of rain. Just a few minutes ago she had a job, a place to work, a chance to survive. Now all of it was gone. Lena slowly turned and looked back at the mansion. From the outside it looked beautiful. The large windows glowed warmly with golden light. The gardens were perfect. The building stood tall and proud against the darkening sky. But Lena knew the truth behind those walls. The mansion was not a home. It was a machine. And machines had no mercy. A soft rumble of thunder rolled across the sky. Within minutes, the rain began to fall. At first it was light, then heavier. Soon, cold drops soaked through Lena's thin coat. She tightened her arms around herself, trying to stay warm. But the rain kept coming. Cars passed on the street, their headlights flashing briefly across her face before disappearing into the night. None of them stopped. No one noticed the young woman standing alone outside the gates of the richest man in the city. Inside the mansion, the staff had returned to their duties. But the atmosphere felt different now. The hallway where Lena had stood earlier felt strangely empty. Mrs. Alvarez quietly wiped the counter in the kitchen, her expression troubled. A younger employee approached her cautiously. "Is she really gone?" he asked softly. Mrs. Alvarez nodded. "She had no chance," she said quietly. The young worker looked toward the hallway where Adrian's office was located. "It wasn't fair." Mrs. Alvarez sighed. "Fairness doesn't exist in this house," she replied. Upstairs, Adrian Cole sat in his office again. His computer screens displayed financial projections and market reports. Another meeting had started. Another deal was being discussed. His voice sounded calm, confident, and controlled as he spoke through the video call. Numbers, contracts, strategies. Everything in his world made sense. Everything followed rules. When the meeting ended, Adrian leaned back in his chair. For a moment, silence filled the room. But then a strange feeling crept into his mind. A brief memory. Lena standing in the hallway. Her pale face. Her trembling voice. Her hand resting protectively over her stomach. Adrian frowned slightly. Why was he thinking about that? He pushed the thought away quickly. He had made the correct decision. Rules were rules. Allowing personal drama among staff would only create chaos. And chaos was something Adrian never allowed. The memory returned again. The broken glass. The fear in Lena's eyes. Adrian stood up abruptly and walked toward the window. Rain now poured heavily across the city. The streets below looked dark and empty. For a moment, a quiet question appeared in the back of his mind. Where had she gone? But Adrian quickly dismissed the thought. Employees came and went all the time. They were not his responsibility. He turned away from the window and returned to his desk. Work always helped silence unnecessary emotions. Meanwhile, across the city, Lena struggled through the rain. Her shoes were soaked. Her coat clung to her skin. She walked for nearly an hour before finally finding a small bus stop with a metal roof. It wasn't much, but it blocked some of the rain. She sat down slowly on the cold bench. Her entire body felt exhausted. The events of the day replayed in her mind again and again. The broken glass. Adrian's cold voice. The security guard escorting her outside. It had all happened so fast. Her life had changed in a single moment. Lena closed her eyes. Her hands slowly moved to her stomach again. The rain continued falling around her. "I'm sorry," she whispered softly. She wasn't sure who she was apologizing to. Maybe to the child growing inside her. Maybe to herself. After a while, Lena stood up again. She couldn't stay at the bus stop all night. She needed somewhere to sleep. Somewhere safe. The city streets felt colder now as night deepened. After searching for nearly another hour, Lena finally found a cheap boarding house tucked between two old buildings. The sign above the door flickered weakly. The room she rented was tiny. Barely enough space for a small bed and a chair. The walls were thin. The air smelled damp. But it was shelter. Lena placed her bag on the floor and slowly sat down on the edge of the bed. Her body felt weak. Her stomach tightened painfully. Stress and exhaustion were beginning to take their toll. She lay back carefully, staring up at the cracked ceiling. Tears quietly slid down the sides of her face. She had worked so hard to escape the life she once had. To build something stable. Something safe. Now she was starting over again. Alone. But after a few minutes, Lena wiped her tears away. Her eyes slowly hardened with determination. She placed both hands gently over her stomach. "We're going to be okay," she whispered. She didn't know how yet. But she would find a way. Because giving up had never been an option for her. Across the city, inside the warm mansion, Adrian Cole worked late into the night. Numbers filled his screens. Profits increased. His empire continued growing. Everything in his world looked successful. Perfect. Controlled. But far away in a small, cold room, a young woman lay awake, struggling to protect a fragile new life. And though Adrian Cole didn't realize it yet, the decision he made that afternoon would soon return to him in a way he never expected. The small room Lena rented was barely larger than a storage closet. The bed creaked every time she moved. The paint on the walls had peeled away in several places, leaving patches of gray concrete exposed underneath. A single window looked out onto the back alley where garbage trucks arrived every morning before sunrise. It was far from the beautiful mansion she once worked in. But to Lena it was enough. Because it meant she had survived another day. The first weeks were the hardest. Lena woke up every morning before the sun rose. Her body felt heavier now. The sickness still came without warning, and the dizziness often returned when she worked too fast. But she couldn't afford to slow down. Not anymore. Her first job was cleaning tables at a small cafe on the corner of Maple Street. The owner paid very little, but he didn't ask too many questions. By the afternoon, Lena worked at a laundromat, folding warm piles of clothes that belonged to strangers who would never know her name. At night, she sometimes helped clean offices in a nearby building. 3 jobs. Long hours. Little pay. But it was enough to keep food on the table. And most importantly, it allowed her to prepare for the child growing inside her. Each night when Lena returned to her tiny room, she carefully counted the money she had earned that day. A small pile of bills. A few coins. Then she placed them inside a metal box she kept hidden beneath the bed. Next to the box was another small item. A notebook. At first, Lena didn't know why she bought it. But one night, after another exhausting shift, She opened the notebook and began writing. Her handwriting was simple but careful. "Dear little one," she wrote on the first page, "I don't know who you will become, but I promise you something. I will do everything I can to give you a better life than the one I had." She paused for a moment, her hand resting on her stomach. "You may not have much when you arrive, but you will have someone who loves you." That became her routine. Every few nights, Lena wrote another message in the notebook. Sometimes about her day. Sometimes about her dreams for the future. Sometimes about the fears she couldn't tell anyone else. The notebook became a quiet conversation between a mother and the child she had not yet met. Meanwhile, life in the neighborhood slowly introduced Lena to people who noticed her struggle. One of them was an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen, who lived in the room next to hers. Mrs. Chen had lived in the building for over 30 years. She had seen many people come and go, and she noticed things others ignored. One evening, Mrs. Chen knocked gently on Lena's door. When Lena opened it, the older woman held out a small bowl of soup. "You work too much," Mrs. Chen said simply. Lena hesitated, surprised. "You must eat." The warm smell of the soup filled the hallway. Lena's eyes softened. "Thank you," she said quietly. From that day forward, Mrs. Chen checked on Lena occasionally. Sometimes she brought food. Sometimes she simply asked if Lena was all right. She never asked too many questions, but she understood enough. The kindness meant more to Lena than she could ever explain. For the first time since leaving the mansion, she no longer felt completely alone. Still, life remained difficult. The pregnancy continued to grow. Her clothes began to feel tighter. Her back hurt more often. Some nights she fell asleep without even changing clothes because she was too tired to move. Yet every morning she forced herself to get up again, because now her strength belonged to someone else too. Across the city, Adrian Cole's life continued exactly as before. His company announced a new international expansion. News channels praised his business genius. Investors lined up to work with him. Inside his office, success surrounded him from every direction. But something strange had begun happening. Sometimes, late at night, when the building was quiet and his meetings were finished, Adrian would pause for a moment. And Lena's face would appear in his mind again. The memory annoyed him. He didn't understand why it kept returning. He had made the logical decision. An employee had broken the rules. The problem was removed. End of story. Yet the memory remained stubborn. Her pale expression. Her silence when he asked about the father. The way she held her stomach. Adrian found himself wondering something he rarely wondered about anyone. What happened to her? But the thought disappeared as quickly as it came. Work always demanded his attention. There was always another meeting. Another contract. Another victory. Late one evening, Adrian stood in front of the large windows in his office again. The city lights stretched endlessly below. People moving. Cars passing. Lives unfolding. Somewhere out there, Lena was still living her life. And for reasons Adrian couldn't explain, the thought made him uneasy. Meanwhile, Lena sat quietly at the small table in her rented room. Her notebook lay open again. The baby inside her had begun moving slightly now. Small, gentle movements that felt like tiny waves beneath her skin. Each time it happened, Lena froze in wonder. Her face filled with a mixture of fear and joy. She placed a hand over her stomach and smiled softly. Then she wrote another message in the notebook. "Today you moved for the first time," she wrote. "It scared me at first. But then I realized you were saying hello." She paused and looked around the tiny room. It wasn't much. But slowly she was preparing it. A small basket for baby clothes. A few blankets she found at a thrift shop. A tiny stuffed animal someone had left behind at the laundromat. Each item was a step toward a future she refused to give up on. Lena closed the notebook and leaned back in her chair. Outside the window, the city continued moving without noticing her. But inside that small room, a quiet battle was being fought every day. A battle for survival. A battle for hope. And although Lena had lost her place in the billionaire's mansion, she was slowly building something far more powerful. A life worth protecting. A life worth fighting for. And soon that life would change everything. Winter arrived quietly in the city. The cold winds swept through the narrow streets, and frost began to appear on the windows each morning. For Lena, every day now felt heavier than the last. Her pregnancy had reached its final months. Walking even short distances left her breathless. Her back ached constantly, and the long hours of work were becoming harder to survive. Still, Lena refused to stop. Every dollar she earned meant more security for the child she would soon bring into the world. One evening, after finishing her shift at the laundromat, Lena slowly walked back toward her apartment building. The sky was dark and the air was bitterly cold. Her steps were careful. But halfway down the street, a sharp pain suddenly tightened across her stomach. Lena stopped walking. Her hand instinctively pressed against her belly. The pain faded after a moment. She exhaled slowly and continued walking. But only a few steps later, the pain returned. Stronger. Her breathing became uneven. Lena leaned against a nearby wall, gripping it tightly. Something was wrong. Her heart began to race. Another wave of pain surged through her body. This time she couldn't stay standing. She slid slowly down the wall until she was sitting on the cold sidewalk. Her voice trembled. "Not yet, please." But the child had its own timing. Across the street, a passerby noticed Lena struggling and rushed toward her. Within minutes, an ambulance was called. The flashing red lights cut through the quiet street as paramedics carefully lifted Lena onto a stretcher. She was barely conscious as they rushed her toward the hospital. Inside the emergency room, doctors quickly realized the situation was serious. Lena had gone into early labor, and her body was exhausted. Months of stress, long work hours, and poor nutrition had weakened her greatly. The baby was also in distress. Doctors and nurses moved quickly through the room. Machines beeped. Instructions were shouted. Time was suddenly running very short. Meanwhile, across the city, life inside Adrian Cole's world continued normally. Inside a large conference room at his company headquarters, Adrian was finishing a late meeting with investors. Charts filled the massive screen behind him. Numbers, growth, expansion. Everything was going according to plan. But as Adrian prepared to leave the building, one of the maintenance supervisors approached him hesitantly. It was Marcus, a former worker from the mansion. "Mr. Cole," Marcus said carefully. Adrian stopped walking. "Yes." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "I wasn't sure if I should mention this, but I thought you might want to know." Adrian's patience was already thin. "Know what?" Marcus hesitated. "That maid who was dismissed a few months ago. Lena." Adrian's expression barely changed. "What about her?" Marcus shifted nervously. "I heard she was taken to the hospital tonight. Something about complications with her pregnancy." For a brief moment, Adrian felt a strange tightening in his chest. He hadn't heard Lena's name spoken aloud in months. And yet, hearing it now stirred something unexpected. "Which hospital?" Adrian asked. Marcus seemed surprised by the question. "St. Matthew's Medical Center." Adrian nodded once. "Understood." Marcus walked away. Adrian stood still for a moment in the empty hallway. The logical part of his mind told him the situation had nothing to do with him. She had been an employee. Nothing more. But the uneasy feeling returned. Stronger this time. Without fully understanding why, Adrian picked up his coat and walked toward the exit. 30 minutes later, Adrian Cole stepped into the quiet lobby of St. Matthew's Hospital. The bright white lights and the smell of disinfectant felt very different from the controlled environment of his office. At the reception desk, Adrian spoke calmly. "I'm looking for a patient named Lena." The nurse checked her computer. "She's in the maternity ward," she said. "She's currently in surgery." "Surgery?" Adrian asked. The nurse nodded. "There were complications during labor. The doctors are doing everything they can." Adrian felt that strange tightening in his chest again. He walked slowly toward the waiting area. The hallway was quiet. Soft footsteps echoed against the tile floor. After several long minutes, a nurse finally stepped out of the operating room. She looked around the hallway. "Family for Lena?" she asked. Adrian hesitated. Then he stepped forward. "Yes." The nurse gave a small nod. "The baby has been delivered." Relief crossed her face. "But the mother lost a lot of strength during the process. She'll need time to recover." Adrian exhaled slowly. "And the baby?" he asked. The nurse smiled softly. "Healthy." She motioned toward a nearby nursery window. "You can see the baby there." Adrian walked toward the glass window. Inside the nursery, several newborn babies slept quietly in small hospital cribs. A nurse gently lifted one of them and placed the child closer to the window. "This is Lena's baby," she said. Adrian stepped closer. And the moment he saw the child, he froze. Completely. The baby's tiny face was peaceful, small, fragile. But something about the child's features struck Adrian like lightning. The shape of the eyes, the soft curve of the nose, even the faint expression on the baby's sleeping face. Adrian's breath caught in his throat, because he had seen that face before. Not recently, not in many years, but long ago, in a small, broken apartment. where two young brothers once lived together. The baby looked exactly like his younger brother, Daniel, who had died many years ago. Memories Adrian had buried deep inside suddenly surged back into his mind. The laughter they once shared. The promises they made to escape poverty together. The day everything fell apart. Adrian's hand slowly pressed against the glass. For the first time in many years, Adrian Cole felt something he had almost forgotten. Emotion. And standing there in the quiet hospital hallway, staring at the newborn child, the billionaire who controlled everything realized something terrifying. This small life was about to change his world forever. Adrian Cole stood silently in the hospital hallway long after the nurse had walked away. Behind the glass, the newborn baby slept peacefully inside the small crib. The soft rise and fall of the child's tiny chest was almost hypnotic. Adrian couldn't look away. The resemblance was undeniable. The baby's face reminded him so much of his younger brother that it made his chest feel tight. For years, Adrian had buried the memories of that part of his life. The poverty. The pain. The day he lost the only person who had ever truly trusted him. But now those memories were rising again one after another. And they all led to one uncomfortable truth. Lena. Something about her story did not make sense. Adrian slowly stepped away from the nursery window. He had spent his entire life solving problems through logic and investigation. And now his instincts were telling him something important. There was more to this story. Much more. The next morning, Adrian returned to his office earlier than usual. His assistant looked surprised to see him arrive before sunrise. But Adrian simply gave her a short instruction. I need information. She immediately understood. Within an hour, Adrian had a file placed on his desk. It contained everything that could be gathered about Lena. Her employment records. Her previous addresses. Her background history. Adrian opened the file slowly. The information inside surprised him. Lena had never worked in a corporate environment before the mansion. Most of her past jobs were simple labor work. Cleaning. Restaurant service. Laundry. But one detail caught his attention immediately. A hospital record from 2 years earlier. Adrian leaned closer and read the report carefully. 2 years ago, Lena had brought an unconscious teenage boy into the emergency room. The boy had collapsed in a subway station. According to the record, Lena had stayed at the hospital for hours until doctors confirmed the boy would survive. She never asked for payment. Never asked for recognition. She simply left quietly. Adrian frowned slightly. Why would someone struggling to survive spend hours helping a stranger? He flipped to the next page. The boy's name appeared clearly on the report. Ethan Cole. Adrian's eyes widened slightly. Ethan was his nephew. His older sister's son. 2 years ago, Ethan had nearly died from a severe allergic reaction after collapsing on his way home from school. The doctors had said that if someone had not brought him to the hospital in time, he would not have survived. Adrian had always assumed a stranger had helped him. But now the record revealed the truth. That stranger had been Lena. The same woman he had thrown out of his mansion. Adrian slowly leaned back in his chair. A heavy silence filled the office. For the first time since the night at the hospital, guilt began creeping into his thoughts. He had punished someone who had once saved his family. And she had never even mentioned it. Adrian continued reading the file. More pieces of Lena's life began to appear. Her parents had died when she was young. She had raised her younger brother, Daniel, almost like a second mother. She worked constantly just to keep him in school. But the file also showed something darker. Lena had once lived with a man named Victor Hale. The report described Victor as abusive. Police records showed several domestic disturbance complaints. But Lena had eventually escaped that situation. She left with nothing except her brother and the clothes they carried. Adrian closed the file slowly. The pieces of the story were finally forming a clearer picture. Lena had never been careless. She had never been irresponsible. She had simply been surviving. Just like Adrian once had. The silence in his office suddenly felt heavier. His mind replayed the moment in the mansion hallway again. Her trembling voice. Her refusal to reveal the father's identity. At the time, Adrian had seen it as dishonesty. Now he understood something else. She had been protecting herself. And perhaps protecting the child. Adrian stood up and walked toward the large window overlooking the city. The morning traffic moved slowly below. Thousands of people rushing through their daily struggles. For years, Adrian had believed power meant control. But now another truth was becoming harder to ignore. Power also carried responsibility. And he had failed that responsibility. A quiet battle began inside his mind. One side of him still clung to pride. The belief that his rules had been necessary. That discipline built success. But another voice inside him was growing louder. A voice he had ignored for many years. Humanity. Adrian closed his eyes for a moment. He had built an empire by making fast decisions. But this one had destroyed someone's life. A life that had once helped save his own family. Adrian opened his eyes again. The cold confidence that once guided every action now felt uncertain. For the first time in many years, Adrian Cole felt ashamed. And deep down he knew one painful truth. Money could buy power. It could buy success. It could build empires. But it could never erase a mistake like the one he had made. And somewhere in a hospital room across the city, Lena was lying beside her newborn child. Still unaware that the man who had cast her out was finally beginning to understand the truth. A truth that would soon force Adrian Cole to face the most difficult decision of his life. Morning sunlight slowly filled the quiet hospital room. The soft light touched the white walls, the small crib beside the bed, and Lena's tired face as she slowly opened her eyes. Her body still felt weak from the long night. Every movement reminded her how close she had come to losing everything. But when she turned her head and saw the tiny baby sleeping peacefully in the crib beside her, a quiet warmth filled her chest. The child was small. Fragile. Wrapped tightly in a pale blue hospital blanket. For a long moment, Lena simply watched the gentle rise and fall of the baby's breathing. Tears quietly formed in her eyes. "We made it," she whispered softly. The door to the room opened quietly. Lena assumed it was a nurse. But when she looked toward the doorway, her entire body froze. Standing there was Adrian Cole. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was thick with memories. The mansion hallway. The broken glass. The cold order that had ended Lena's job and nearly destroyed her life. Lena's expression hardened. Her arms instinctively moved toward the crib. "What are you doing here?" she asked weakly. Her voice carried exhaustion but also anger. Adrian remained near the door. He looked different than the man Lena remembered. Still composed. Still powerful. But something in his eyes had changed. For the first time since Lena had known him, Adrian looked uncertain. "I came to see if you were all right," he said quietly. Lena gave a faint, bitter laugh. "Now you care." The words were soft, but they carried months of pain. Adrian did not defend himself. Instead, he stepped a little closer, though he kept his distance from the bed. "I know I have no right to ask for anything from you," he said. "But I owe you an apology." The words sounded strange coming from him. Adrian Cole was a man who rarely admitted mistakes. But this time the truth left him no choice. "I judged you without knowing the full story," he continued. "I enforced my rules without thinking about the consequences for you." Lena said nothing. Her eyes remained locked on him. "I investigated your past," Adrian added quietly. "I learned what you did for my nephew." Lena's expression flickered slightly with surprise. Adrian continued speaking slowly. "You saved his life 2 years ago. And you never told anyone." Lena looked down at the blanket covering her legs. "That wasn't something I did for attention," she said softly. Adrian nodded. "I understand that now." He glanced toward the crib beside her. The baby shifted slightly, letting out a small sound. Adrian's voice softened. "I also saw the child." Lena's arms tightened protectively around the crib. Her eyes immediately filled with suspicion. "You're not taking my baby," she said firmly. The fear in her voice was clear. Adrian shook his head immediately. "No." His answer came quickly and honestly. "I'm not here to take anything from you." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I'm here to offer help." Lena studied him carefully. "Why?" she asked. Adrian took a slow breath. "Because I was wrong." The simple truth filled the room. "For years, I believed rules were the only thing that kept people from destroying everything," Adrian said. "But I forgot something important." He looked down at the small child again. "People are not problems to be removed." Silence filled the room again. Lena's eyes softened slightly, though the pain was still there. "You can't undo what happened," she said quietly. "I know," Adrian replied. "But I can try to make things right." He reached into his coat and placed a folder gently on the small table near the bed. "I've arranged medical support for you and the baby." Lena did not touch the folder. "I don't want charity," she said firmly. Adrian nodded. "I'm not offering charity." He continued calmly. "I'm offering responsibility." He explained that he had arranged safe housing, medical care, and financial stability for the child. But there was one important condition. Lena would remain fully in control of her life. The support came with no demands. No contracts forcing her loyalty. No control over her future. For the first time since he entered the room, Lena looked genuinely surprised. "Why would you do that?" she asked quietly. Adrian's answer was simple. "Because someone once gave me a chance when I had nothing," he said. "And I almost forgot what that meant." The baby stirred again, letting out a tiny cry. Lena gently lifted the child into her arms. For a moment, Adrian watched silently. The small baby opened its eyes briefly. Adrian felt the same strange emotion again. The resemblance to his brother still haunted him. But this time the feeling was different. Not pain. Hope. Lena finally looked back at Adrian. Her voice was softer now. "I don't trust you," she admitted. Adrian nodded. "You shouldn't," he replied honestly. "Trust has to be rebuilt." Another long silence passed between them. Then Lena looked down at her baby again. She thought about the future. About the struggles that still waited ahead. And about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, people could change. Slowly, she reached toward the folder on the table. "I'll accept help," she said carefully. "But on my terms." Adrian gave a small nod. That's exactly how it should be. For the first time since the day everything fell apart, a fragile bridge began forming between them. Not built on power. Not built on control. But built on something Adrian Cole had almost forgotten existed. Accountability. And perhaps, one day, forgiveness. Spring arrived slowly in the city. The cold winds faded. The gray skies began to clear. Trees that had stood bare all winter slowly filled with green leaves again. For Lena, the passing months felt like the beginning of a completely different life. The small hospital room where everything had changed was now only a memory. She and her baby now lived in a modest but comfortable apartment arranged through Adrian's support. It was not a mansion. It was not luxury. But it was safe, warm, and filled with something Lena had not felt in a long time. Stability. The baby boy, whom Lena named Noah, had grown stronger with each passing week. His tiny fingers curled around hers when she fed him. His soft laughter filled the quiet apartment with a kind of joy Lena had never known before. Every morning, Lena would sit near the window with Noah in her arms, watching the city slowly wake up. She still worked hard. She had taken a small administrative job at a community center that Adrian quietly helped fund. The job paid enough for Lena to support herself without depending entirely on his assistance. It was important to her. She needed independence. She needed dignity. And Adrian had respected that. Their relationship had changed in a quiet but meaningful way. Adrian did not visit often. He understood that trust would take time. But sometimes he would stop by briefly. Never with security guards. Never with the commanding presence he once carried. Instead, he arrived quietly. Almost carefully. The first time Adrian held Noah, his expression had been difficult to read. The baby looked up at him with curious eyes, completely unaware of the complicated history between the two adults in the room. Adrian had held him gently. Almost nervously. As if afraid the fragile life in his hands might disappear if he moved too quickly. In that moment, Lena had noticed something she had never seen in Adrian before. Vulnerability. Months earlier, Adrian Cole had been a man defined by control. Now he was learning something entirely new. Responsibility beyond power. But the changes in Adrian's life did not stop there. The events surrounding Lena and Noah had forced him to rethink more than just one decision. They had forced him to rethink the way he lived. Inside his company, Adrian began introducing changes that surprised many of his executives. New policies appeared. Employees now had access to parental support programs, medical assistance, emergency housing options, special programs designed for single parents working within the company. At first, many investors questioned these decisions. They worried the programs would cost money, reduce profits. But Adrian remained firm. For once, he was not thinking only about numbers. He was thinking about people. Word of the changes spread quickly through the company. Employees who had once feared Adrian began seeing him differently. He was still disciplined, still intelligent, still powerful. But something about him had softened. Even the mansion itself had changed. The rigid rules that once controlled every corner of the house slowly relaxed. The staff were no longer treated like silent machines. Mrs. Alvarez remained the head housekeeper, but now her role included helping oversee employee well-being programs. For the first time in years, laughter could sometimes be heard in the staff kitchen. Something that would have been impossible before. And Adrian noticed it. He noticed it more than he expected. One afternoon, several months after Noah's birth, Adrian visited Lena again. The apartment felt warm and peaceful. Noah was lying on a soft blanket on the floor, waving his tiny arms excitedly. Lena watched him with a gentle smile. Adrian stood nearby, observing the child carefully. "You've gotten bigger," Adrian said quietly. Noah responded with a small laugh, kicking his legs happily. Lena looked up at Adrian. "You're getting used to him," she said. Adrian allowed a faint smile. "I suppose I am." For a moment, the room was filled only with the quiet sounds of the baby. Then Lena spoke again. "You've changed a lot." Adrian looked thoughtful. "I'm trying to." He watched Noah for another moment. "You know," Adrian said slowly, "for most of my life I believed success meant building something powerful." He paused. "But now I'm starting to understand something different." Lena waited quietly. Adrian continued. "Success isn't just about what you build. It's about who your choices affect." The words hung in the air. And Lena knew he meant them, because she had seen the change herself. The man who once cast her out without hesitation now stood in her home, carefully watching a child he had once almost left behind. Time had transformed him. But the most important transformation was still happening inside Adrian himself. That night, after leaving Lena's apartment, Adrian returned to his office building. The city skyline stretched across the dark horizon. Lights glowed in thousands of windows. Lives unfolding everywhere. For years, Adrian had believed his legacy would be measured by his company, his wealth, his empire. But as he stood there looking out at the city, he realized something deeper. His legacy would not be the technology he created. It would not be the buildings that carried his name. It would be the lives he chose to protect, the mistakes he chose to correct, and the compassion he finally allowed into his life. Across the city, Lena rocked Noah gently to sleep. The small notebook she had written in during her pregnancy now rested on the table beside her. She opened it again and turned to a blank page. Then she began writing. "Dear Noah," she wrote, "life may not always be fair. But sometimes people change. And sometimes kindness can grow even in the hardest places." She closed the notebook and looked down at her sleeping son. Outside the window, the city lights shimmered softly. And somewhere within that city, a billionaire who once ruled with cold control was slowly learning the greatest lesson of all. True wealth was never about money. It was about compassion. Because one cruel decision could break a life. But one act of redemption could rebuild it.